Hello and welcome back to Life Lessons with Sheila. Welcome to a Writing Wednesday. As many of you know, I have set out to write a cozy Christian romance novel just in time for Thanksgiving. In fact, we're on target for the first Tuesday in November for a release date, so yay! This is by far my favorite book that I have written so far, and sure to be one that you will enjoy reading if you enjoy 1. Clean fiction, 2. A clean romance, 3. Girl drama, just a little bit, and 4. Books that have a deep family roots driven into the storyline. I thought I would give you a preview of what's in store, because if the first chapter does not grab your attention, you likely are not going to finish it unless you are determined. So why not give you a taste for free? And speaking of taste, I did not realize when I set out to write this one, but much like my book, Christmas Deleted, I'm going to include a few recipes from items mentioned in this book at the end of the book for you to enjoy. Let's hop in and see what Chapter 1 has to offer. The early morning sun cast a soft glow over Fredericksburg, Texas, painting the small town in warm hues of gold and amber. Nestled just outside of Austin, Fredericksburg was known for its quaint charm, with its historic main street lined with boutique shops, charming restaurants, and a delightful mix of German and Texan culture. It was a perfect place to spend a quiet autumn morning, which was exactly what Grace Baker had planned. Thanksgiving was a week away, and the small town was already starting to buzz with holiday preparations. She stood in the cozy kitchen of the Book Nook, her beloved bookstore that had become a staple in the community. The scent of freshly baked cinnamon rolls and brewing coffee filled the air, creating an inviting atmosphere that drew in early morning customers seeking warmth and comfort. The Book Nook was more than just a bookstore. It was a haven for book lovers and a gathering place for friends. With its coffee bar and small bakery tucked inside, it was the heart of Fredericksburg's literary community. Grace loved her store, with its rows of well-loved books, soft leather chairs, and a fireplace that crackled softly in the corner. The walls were lined with wooden shelves overflowing with titles that spanned every genre imaginable. A small counter at the back served as a coffee bar, where customers could order a latte or a cup of tea to enjoy while they perused the latest bestsellers or settled in for a quiet read. But today, Grace's thoughts were far from the cozy comfort of her bookstore. She stood at the counter, gazing out the large front window, her eyes distant as she watched the leaves dance in the gentle breeze outside. Her mind drifted to Thanksgiving's past, to the years when Jackson was still alive and their children were young, filling their home with laughter and joy. She could almost hear Jackson's deep, rich voice echoing through the kitchen as he teased her about burning the turkey, something that had never actually happened, but had become a running joke between them. She smiled at the memory, her heart aching with a familiar pang of longing. It had been 3 years since Jackson passed away, but the pain of his absence still felt as fresh as if it were just yesterday. Grace turned away from the window, brushing away a stray tear. She couldn't afford to dwell on the past today. The store was about to be open for the day, but she still had preparations to make for Thanksgiving dinner on her mind. It would be a small affair this year, just her and Everett Calloway, Jackson's best friend and now her closest confidant, along with their children, who were anything but children lately. All of them had grown up very quickly, but Emerson, Everett's son, had a hard time dealing with his parents' divorce. Harris and Duke, Grace and Jackson's twin sons, were good friends with Emerson. Abilene, their daughter, always looked on Emerson as just another brother. Everett had been a constant source of support since Jackson's death, always checking in on her, making sure she was okay. He had gone through his own heartbreak, a painful divorce from his wife, Lillian, that just left him questioning what the future held. But through it all, he had been there for Grace, and she had been there for him, their friendship deepening in the face of shared loss. Grace walked over to the counter where the tray of cinnamon rolls were cooling, their sweet, spicy aroma filling the air. She picked one up, savoring the warmth in her hands, and took a bite, closing her eyes as the flavors melted on her tongue. Baking had become a form of therapy for her, a way to keep her hands busy and help to prevent her mind from wandering to darker places. It was one of the many things she'd taken up since Jackson's passing, along with opening the book nook and writing the occasional book from time to time. She had always loved to write, but it wasn't until Jackson's death that she truly found her voice. Her stories were a way to process her grief, to explore the depths of her emotions, and to find a sense of peace in the chaos of her life. She wrote about love and loss, about finding hope in the darkest of times, and about the strength of the human spirit. It was her way of healing, and in sharing her words with others, she found a sense of purpose and fulfillment. As she finished her cinnamon roll, Grace's thoughts turned to Everett. He was supposed to arrive in a couple hours, but she hadn't heard from him yet. She hoped everything was okay. Everett was a police officer with the Fredericks Police Department, and his job often kept him busy, even on holidays. She knew he had been working late the night before and hoped he was getting much needed rest. Just as she was about to reach for her phone to check in with him, the front door of the bookstore swung open and a gust of cool autumn air rushed in. Grace looked up, surprised to see Everett standing in the doorway, his face flushed from the cold, a wild smile spreading across his lips. "Morning, Grace," he said, his voice warm and familiar. "I know I'm early, but I thought I'd stop by and see if you needed any help with the preparations for Thursday's feast." Grace's heart lifted at the sight of him, his presence, a welcome distraction from her melancholy thoughts. Everett was tall and broad-shouldered, with a rugged handsomeness that had only deepened with age. His sandy blonde hair was slightly tousled, and his blue eyes sparkled with the light that belied the hardships he had faced. "Everett, I wasn't expecting to see you today," Grace said, wiping her hands on her apron as she hurried over to meet him. "But I'm glad you're here. I wanted to make sure to invite you and Emerson over to my house for Thanksgiving dinner. I could use some help with the turkey. I'm afraid I'm a bit out of practice." Everett chuckled, his laughter filling the room with a comforting warmth. "I'm sure you'll do just fine, Grace, but I'm happy to lend a hand. Anything to avoid another one of Jackson's infamous turkey-burning jokes." Grace smiled, the mention of Jackson's name bringing a bittersweet twinge to her heart. He did love to tease, didn't he? "That he did," Everett agreed, his expression softening as he thought of his old friend. "He was a good man, Grace, and he would be so proud of you and everything you have accomplished." Grace felt a lump form in her throat at his words, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Thank you, Everett. That means a lot to me." "So what's new with you, Everett?" Grace asked after a moment, breaking the silence. "How's work been?" Everett sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Busy as always. We've had a few cases lately that have been keeping us on our toes, but I'm managing. It's good to stay busy, you know. Keeps my mind off things." Grace nodded, understanding all too well the need to keep occupied. "I get that. This place has been a godsend for me. It gives me something to focus on, something to look forward to. And the community has been so supportive. I couldn't have done it without them." Everett smiled, his eyes filled with admiration. "You've done an amazing job, Grace. The Book Nook is a wonderful place, and it's clear how much it means to you, and to everyone else, too. You've created something special here." Grace felt a blush rise to her cheeks at his praise, her heart swelling with pride. "Thank you, Everett. That means a lot coming from you. I just wanted to create a place where people could come and feel at home, a place where they could find solace in a good book or a warm cup of coffee, and I think I've done that." "You have," Everett said softly, his gaze intense as he looked at her. "You built something beautiful, Grace. I'm proud of you." Grace felt a flutter in her chest at his words, a sensation she hadn't felt in a long time. She looked away, trying to hide the blush that crept up her neck. "Thank you, Everett. That means more than you know." "Well, I just wanted to stop by and say hello to you before I headed into work, and to grab a pumpkin spice latte and a cinnamon roll, if you don't mind," Everett said with a soft, gentle manner that she had come to expect from him lately. "Of course, and it's on the house." Grace gave Everett a gentle smile and promised to call him in the next day or so to talk about Thanksgiving plans. She watched him leave, then instantly felt a deep yearning to call him back to her. She had this overwhelming sensation of embracing him and drawing him close to her, but she was afraid. If she did, she wouldn't be able to let go. Grace stood behind the counter, a steaming mug of coffee cradled in her hands, and watched Everett walk out of the store and onto the quiet street outside. The vibrant autumn leaves swirled in the light breeze, dancing across the pavement. Inside the bookstore, the atmosphere was cozy and inviting. Shelves lined with books of all genres wrapping around the space like a comforting hug, while the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and baked goods from the small bakery nestled in the back filled the air. It was her sanctuary, this place, her refuge from the world. Grace had always loved Thanksgiving. Memories of Thanksgiving past began to flood her mind. It was Jackson's favorite holiday, and his enthusiasm had been infectious. Every year he would throw himself into preparations with a boyish excitement that never failed to make her smile. She could still see him in their kitchen, laughing as he marinated the turkey, humming a tune as he peeled potatoes, or teasing her about her insistence on making everything from scratch. A smile tugged at her lips as she thought about their first Thanksgiving as a married couple. They had just moved into a tiny apartment in Austin, living on love and little else. The kitchen had been barely big enough for one person, let alone two, and they had fumbled their way through the meal, burning the rolls, overcooking the turkey, but none of it had mattered. They had eaten on the floor, picnic style, sharing a bottle of cheap wine, and laughed until they cried. As the years passed, their Thanksgivings had become more elaborate. With the arrival of their children, Abilene, Duke, and Harris, the holiday grew into a joyful chaos. Grace remembered the early mornings, waking up to the smell of coffee and the sound of Jackson moving around in the kitchen, starting the day's preparations. The kids would soon follow, bounding down the stairs with sleepy smiles, eager to help in any way they could. It was a day filled with love, laughter, and the delicious aroma of turkey roasting in the oven. Grace could still hear Jackson's voice filled with laughter as he played with the kids, chasing them around the house in a mock turkey dance, much to their squeals of delight. He was always the life of the party, the one who made everyone feel welcomed and loved. His infectious energy could light up the room, and he had a way of making every Thanksgiving feel like the best one yet. Her heart ached at the thought of him. She missed his warmth, his laugh, and the way his eyes would crinkle in the corners when he smiled. She missed the way he would wrap his arms around her from behind while she stirred the gravy, pressing a kiss into her cheek and whispering in her ear how thankful he was to have her in his life. Grace took a deep breath, trying to steady herself against the wave of emotion that threatened to overwhelm her. She had promised herself she wouldn't cry today, which she had already failed at. She had shed enough tears over the past 3 years and didn't want to ruin another Thanksgiving with her grief. Jackson wouldn't have wanted that. He would have wanted her to be happy, to find joy in the memories that they had created together. "Mom," a voice called out, pulling her from her thoughts. Grace turned to see Abilene standing in the entryway, a concerned look on her face. Her daughter had inherited Jackson's eyes, bright and full of life, and every time Grace looked deeply into them, she was reminded of the man she had lost. It was both a comfort and a pain, a constant reminder of what could never be again. "Are you okay?" Abilene asked, stepping forward and wrapping her arms around her mother in a comforting hug. "You look lost in thought." Grace managed to put a small smile, hugging her daughter back tightly. "I'm fine, sweetie. Just thinking about your dad." Abilene nodded, pulling back to look at her mother, her eyes soft with understanding. "I miss him too, Mom, especially around this time of year." Grace nodded, her throat tightened with emotion. "I know it's hard to believe it's been 3 years. Sometimes it feels like just yesterday, and other times it feels like a lifetime ago." Abilene gave her mother's hand a reassuring squeeze. "He'd want us to be happy, Mom. He'd want us to celebrate just like we used to." "I know," Grace said, taking a deep breath and trying to steady her voice. I just miss him so much. The holidays were always his favorite time of year. He loved Thanksgiving. Abilene smiled softly. Remember the year he tried to deep fry the turkey and almost burned the house down? Grace laughed, the sound surprising her with its brightness. How could I forget? He was so determined to try something new, even though I told him it was a terrible idea. I'd never seen him move so fast and that oil started bubbling over. Abilene joined in laughter, the memory bringing a warmth to the room that had been missing for too long. Duke still talks about that Thanksgiving every year. He swears it was the best one ever. Grace nodded, her smile fading as the weight of the day settled back on her shoulders. He always did have a way of making everything an adventure. He made everything more fun. Abilene squeezed her mother's hand again, and he made us a family, and that's what we have to remember, Mom. That's what we must hold on to. Grace nodded, blinking back tears as she looked at her daughter. You're right, Abilene. We have to hold on to the good memories, the love we shared. That's what matters most. If this book sounds interesting to you, then please consider tucking back $16 for your copy and marking your calendars for the first Tuesday in November. This may actually be the first in a series, but I'm not 100% sure. I know, though, that I'm falling in love with the characters, so we shall see. You will know by the time this book is published if another one will be included in the series, because if I do, I will allude to it at the end of the book. Thanks for listening and enjoying this journey along with me. I will be done writing this book this week, so next Wednesday, I will share how I prepare to publish it. Maybe. We shall see. Until next time, have a fabulous day, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.